Well, maybe I'll just introduce, and this first slide is just to remind us, you know, it's committee meeting 7, and we'll be talking about future meetings in a moment, but I think what we're hoping again tonight is probably about, you know, 7 to 9 or so, but we'll go as long as you have questions and the committee needs time. So on the agenda, what we're hoping to do is talk about a little bit the upcoming dates on the project schedule, and then on the draft plan sections, get comments from you on transportation and sustainability. Have a discussion on that, and then we're going to go through item 4 there. You can see the last 2 chapters of the plan actually are housing, neighborhood preservation, and then cultural and historic resources, and just to highlight those. And then we want to end up with where we are on engagement and any other items for discussion. So that's the overall agenda. And by the way, I just want to mention here that Melissa and Pat are now listed as co-chairs for the committee. And so we're very happy. We had a conversation with them this morning just to get ready for this meeting and you know, go through the schedule with them. So you can see other committee members, 2 village board trustees, planning board member, and I think we've had very good input and from all of the committee members. This next slide just gives you the staff that we're working with. Karen and Jaime as your planning director, and of course also deputy manager and Stuart. And then in terms of just the planning department, you can see Jamie Kane there and Jamie Hoffman. Our own team, I think most of you know our team now, so I won't go through the whole team. I just want to recognize that if there's questions tonight, the school study that was part of the infrastructure study, I think I'll try to answer those because Tina Lund could not attend tonight. But all other questions on water, sewer, that type of thing in the infrastructure chapter, Joe is here, you know, on this meeting tonight. And we just go over the project schedule with you. This meeting tonight, we're going to be able to, I think, highlight the last 2 chapters before the end of the draft. That is, the end of the draft will be an action plan, and we'll get to that in a moment. But we hope tonight to go through a little bit with you, question and Q&A with the chapters we sent you, and then highlight the 2 that we're going to do. I might mention that the public survey was closed. We extended it through August, and then close that. It's all tabulated, and we wanted to send that to you. Sylvia sent that to you this afternoon. So we're pretty much on the comprehensive plan where we hoped to be, and we're also been meeting and briefing the trustees on where we are and on zoning, and also on the all in yellow here is the seeker process, and the trustees have declared themselves lead agency for seeker. They because they have the state, under state law, the obligation to, or the ability to adopt the plan and the zoning. They are by default the lead agency for seeker, and they've declared the need to do a full EIS, and they're going to have a scoping session, just so you all know, on that January, later this month, sorry, not January, September 24th at the community center. So that'll be publicized, and the draft scoping document will be put up. So those are the overall, some of the overall dates. We're aiming, as you can see, we're pretty much on schedule, I think. And we hope that as the committee finishes up the plan in October, November, you can see the draft plan there would eventually go to the trustees. And then hopefully the trustees can have a public hearing, their own public hearing in February on the draft plan, the draft zoning code update, and then the draft generic environmental impact statement. And I think the next slide just gives you some details of this. Hopefully tonight you can see there, we'll get your comments on transportation and sustainable infrastructure. And feel free, I mean, if you haven't had an adequate time to read those, just, you know, whenever you have comments, if you could, you know, by the month, let's say, get any comments through Jaime and Karen. And then tonight we'll highlight a little bit housing and cultural, as you can see there for 9:15. And then we'll have drafts of those prior to the October meeting for you. So that's the overall details of it. And I think this slide gives you now sort of, we've completed these first, except for the introduction. By the way, we always write the introduction at the end so we can explain what's in the plan and sort of provide an executive summary. But in terms of this regular chapters, we're now through, as you can see there, sustainable infrastructure. So we're through chapter 7. And as you know, the plan outline has in it 10 chapters. So the next 2, as you can see there in green, are housing and neighborhood preservation, and then cultural and historic resources. And we're going to highlight those tonight a little bit. And then finally, after those are done, just want to briefly say that sort of after that, there will be an action agenda. And what I wanted to mention in terms of the future here, we talked to the co-chairs this morning about that. The state law requires that if there is a committee, which we have here, during preparation of the plan, the law states you need to hold a public hearing. And it's just on a working draft, wherever the draft is at the moment. So we felt on your October 20th meeting that would be the meeting to also hold a public hearing on the working draft, because otherwise we would be, if we went further, you would already have the plan done. And state law kind of requires that you have the hearing on a working draft during preparation of the plan. So we thought October 20th would be that date for it. And then after that, we can develop with you, or you could develop or take the lead in it. Chapter 10 we see in the plan as an action agenda, sort of the summary of the plan, a future land use map. And that would then be a meeting probably in your November meeting. That's the overall draft plan sections. So Simon, do you want to take it here on transportation and also on the sustainable infrastructure chapter? This is really to just have a discussion with you, the committee.
Sure. Exactly. On these next 2 slides, you know, these are basically a place to pause and just see if anyone has any comments on what we've sent so far. As Frank said, if you've not had a chance to dig into them yet, that's fine. We can take comments, of course, anytime going forward. But you know, ideally within the next couple of weeks through Jaime and Karen. But if anyone's had a chance to start looking through the transportation chapter, we can start talking about that tonight. Mark Frecker from our firm is on, who did most of the writing here, so he can help answer any questions as well. Any comments? Any questions anyone has on the draft transportation chapter so far?
I might just mention that the very first dot point you see there is partly mentioned in the 2009 plan, and we thought it was important because if the state does improve Route 9A, theoretically, it may attract some through traffic or keep through traffic, you know, that might use Route 9, Highland Avenue now, that may not be coming into Ossining, but just driving through to actually use 9A, so that it would take a little bit of pressure off Highland Avenue. So those were kind of 2 important things to start with on the transportation chapter.
So this is Pat. I'll jump in if nobody to start the conversation. And so I did have a chance to read through the transportation chapter. I didn't have as much time to read through the sustainable infrastructure one yet. So that's it from that perspective. But I thought that for me, from a transportation perspective, I thought that it personally hit on all the key areas that I thought would be relevant, right? Cleaning up the 9A. We've talked a lot about Route 9 relative to Highland Avenue, and then how that is a challenge cutting through the middle of the village, right? And so I think that that's something that it absolutely makes sense, right? From that standpoint, the connectivity, between the downtown and the waterfront, I think is absolutely important. But I think that specifically calling out the connectivity between what I'm going to call like the lower business district or the Crescent and Croton Avenue, the upper business district, right, is just as important too, right? From that perspective. And then, for me, I think that was it, right? The sidewalk system and pedestrians is absolutely correct. And then I like I've always been a big believer in that a couple of parking structures will really help out the village a lot, both in terms of freeing up space that's currently being used by parking and both, something in the middle of town. And I've always believed the Brandred site, and then down at a multi-level garage down at the train station, would be, I think very, what's the right word? I think would be very, because they would jumpstart things from that perspective, from a town,
Right.
from the village's standpoint. So.
Transformative.
Great, thank you.
So from that standpoint, so the one part that I agree with, but I really struggle with a little bit is how just given the space we have, how do we really improve the bicycle infrastructure? I agree with it, but I struggle with how does it happen, right, from that perspective. So.
Yeah.
And Pat, I think it is a difficult one, which we tried to mention in the chapter, because Ossining you're built out. Actually, the site visit we had this past Saturday morning, particularly on Croton Avenue, and as you get up to 133, where it breaks off from Pleasantville Road, the avenue itself, you've got buildings very close to the street. And then you've got a narrow road, which is a state designated road. So it is difficult on a street like that, where you've got some narrow streets, to put in, for instance, protected bike lanes. We were saying in the study that the safest bike lane is the type of bike route you might have on Croton Aqueduct, or on the Aqueduct Trail, is a bike lane that's separated from the road, or a bike lane that is a joint use lane with pedestrian pathway or sidewalk. But then when you go to the road, you need some room. We felt, for instance, you had that room on Main Street, between downtown and the water. Particularly if you made Main Street, you saw that recommendation probably to one way toward the waterfront downhill. That has the width to either create a wider sidewalk, or more parking, or put a bike lane in. It's difficult, and we hope that in downtown, I think that the village now has on board Nelson Nygaard. They have a strong group in bicycles and in bike issues. So in the downtown area, I think they'll be taking a closer look at that. We've made a suggestion in the Main Street area connecting the waterfront.
Take yourself off here. One question I had on that was, I know that we're starting, I think there's a traffic study coming, I forget the name of the company that's about to start.
Yeah, that's it. Nelson Nygaard is the company. Yeah, and it's a traffic and parking study, right?
Parking study. Okay.
Right.
Does the scope of that include the waterfront area, or is that just the downtown?
I should defer to Karen and Jaime a little bit here. I'm not up to date on the exact scope.
Nope, it's really just the downtown. It's only talking to commuters by way of traffic in the downtown. So it's not really related to the train station. That's not the scope at this point. That's not to say that we couldn't try to integrate a couple key things, but we're not doing occupancy studies or anything like that at the train station.
Okay, all right, that's helpful. Just because personally, I think it'd be something to consider, right? At least potentially in limited scope. If we are seriously considering, some of the flow pieces down at the train station, if they're looking at flow, that might be a natural extension.
Despite the fact that it's not the scope, when you do these studies, like obviously like major areas where you require parking, it's also a mobility study. So it's not just parking, it's about mobility and different methods of mobility and access to the train station will play into that. So I do think that it's hard to talk about the downtown transportation and mobility without actually talking about the fact that it is there is a transit-oriented element there.
Okay, and I think that makes sense, right? So it's because I think I agree that like turning Main Street into one-way west is I think that would help some of the flow. But I think what would improve it would be, from a detailed comment, like, if you take away a couple of parking spots in the middle of the lot there, instead of coming down Main Street and kind of dead-ending into parking and you've got to like go tight right or tight left, if you could go through those parking spots to the far side of the parking lot and take a left, you'd be able to have a really good circulation going on down there. And I think that'd be something fairly simple to do from that standpoint. But so, what else did I have?
Pat,
Yes.
I'm not sure. Do you have any other questions? I had a few comments and questions. I don't want to interrupt. Okay, thank
That's
you.
it for me. I was gonna open it up and see if anyone else had thoughts and questions.
All right, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. So something real quick, because I was going over some, I guess whoever does the shared doc folders, if they can update one of the links in there under the transportation, the mobility and parking management. No, I'm sorry, the Millwood, Austin, and Go Bike and pedestrians. That link is broken or is not available, I guess. So I wanted to kind of see what that means for us. But in general, I think one of the biggest questions that I have, and this is just a general question to anybody on this call right now, is if we were to compare the 2009 transportation chapter to the 2021, I want to call it transportation chapter, probably Frank and Simon or anybody and they'd be able to help me. What is the biggest difference that we see? Because I'm seeing something very similar. Sure, I'm seeing this still after 10 years. We're still struggling with the intersection of Spring Street and Main. We're still struggling with Route 9. We're still struggling with the major components that in 2009, they were concerned then that we are now. So what can we do? I guess this is the general question. What can we do, and what would the recommendations be from the steering committee to the board so we can take implementations on this? How do we improve, right now, and right now we're doing a big capital project on Broad Avenue. A lot of the stuff is happening right now because of a grant. We are doing a lot of ADA accessibility to that. The repaving is going to go in there. I'm sure Joe is familiar with a lot of the stuff that is happening. I'm not sure if Paul talked to you about that, but that is happening now. So what can we do as a steering committee make this chapter more goal oriented, I guess, more like these are the stuff that we need to do. Not just reading material for the next comp plan that is going to happen in another 11 years from now.
Manny, I could take a first crack at the first part of your question. And it's not a difference in policy between 2009 and the current draft. It's just when we looked at 2009, we thought it was very good transportation chapter and well written, but it had no maps or graphics. It didn't have data on the, average annual daily traffic, where the crashes were. And we've always found that if you have data to support your policy recommendations, that is, extremely helpful. But the latter part of your question, there are some new emphases here. And I want to thank actually your planner, Jaime, for one of them, and that's this idea at the waterfront. We took that waterfront tour. Those are there's some new ideas there in the waterfront area for expanding Angle Park. But the issue there is we would have to eliminate parking to do it. And Jaime suggested a location, which we went to look at. I think it works very well, a location of a potential parking garage in the future that would be adjacent to the train station, but on the inland side of it, so the east side of it. And then there's a whole set of sidewalk recommendations, as you know, I know you were on that site visit. And then, as you know, also, we had a slightly different take on connecting the roads. We think that Secor Road, I remember discussing this with you and Omar, on Secor Road, keeping it two-way. That's a little different than the 2009 plan, but do make Main Street one-way down to the west, and you could put the same sidewalk improvements you now have done on Secor on Main. And I think that those things would be significant, improvements, transportation improvements. Now, we realize that some of them are easier than others. Parking garage and funding it long-term, possibly with a developer, it is not, it's going to take some time, but we thought it was worth putting in. That is new. That kind of thing is new. In terms of the downtown, we stayed away a little bit from great details. We focused on the overlay zone, the sort of the form-based overlay zone, because we knew that you would be entering into this mobility and parking study of downtown, and I think some detailed, that'll be a detailed focus on what to do in downtown. But given that we've developed and are developing now, as you know, a form-based code for downtown, which will get at design issues that Jonathan is working on, Jonathan Martin is working on. So I think there are some new things here and new things to focus on. One immediate one, I'm hoping that, I know there's other town villages that are concerned with safety. There's a lot of safety issues and crash data issues on Route 9. If that could be, if the towns got together and villages and really, pursued that improvement with DOT, that could really take the traffic off of 9A. Then on 9A, you could concentrate with DOT as trying to slow down traffic and trying to, make it more pedestrian friendly. Right now, 9A has a lot of traffic on it. So it's, the more you can take off in terms of improvement.
You talking about 9 or 9A?
I'm talking, let me distinguish. When I say 9A, that's the Briarcliff Peekskill Parkway. Jaime, that's out where, you have the, where the office is, I think, right?
Yeah, you're talking about trying to make 9A pedestrian friendly? I just want to
No, the opposite. Trying to make 9A a real parkway that is grade separated, that eliminates lights, increases capacity, and increases the safety of it the way a parkway is usually designed. Then, if that's done, that's going to encourage people to use the parkway as opposed to Route 9, as opposed to Highland Avenue. So that, to us is an important thing to do transportation-wise. It could relieve traffic congestion, or the growth in it, on Highland Avenue on Route 9. We think that would help. I know that, of course, the new firm that you've retained, Nelson Nygaard, will look at in detail, I presume, at the intersection of Highland and Croton. I mean, that's a big intersection, which I know has separated it separates, as Pat just mentioned, it separates Crescent from Croton Avenue, and you got a pedestrian issue there. So I think from a regional point of view, if you can get a parkway that works, a regional road system that works around you, that would take off some of the pressure on Highland Avenue. It's not going to solve by the way, it's not going to reduce traffic probably, but it could reduce the growth in traffic, and it could reduce a little pressure on Highland Avenue. So that's the kernel of that thought is not new, of course. It's in the 2009 plan. And I know various mayors have suggested that to state DOT. Our understanding is DOT is willing to do a major investment study of the parkway. And if they could make the parkway safer and better functioning, then I think regional traffic that's not bound for Ossining, but it's just going through Ossining right now, would be incentivized to use the parkway. And that would leave traffic aimed at downtown in Ossining or Ossining residents more using Highland Avenue, and it could relieve pressure on Highland Avenue. So that's a thought. We started off with that as one thing that, Manny, in answer to your question, though, I think that's a regional item you could press in on. There are others that, are in the plan that we've, I just mentioned on the waterfront, Main Street. I think the parking garage downtown, of course, is also not a new idea, nor is, we also have the idea of the, sort of a jitney service or a sort of a trolley service to connect downtown. We think it might have a little more viability now, in that you have the Sing Sing Museum as it appears to us now to be a much more real, potential for Ossining than it has been in the past.
Manny, one other difference between this version and the 09 plan, which is not specific to the transportation chapter, is that action agenda and implementation chapter that Frank referred to. We typically dive into that toward the end once we have all the objectives and strategies together so that we can look at them. For example, we'll look at them with all of you at the November 17 meeting. We'll probably also look at them with the trustees and think about, and here's what was missing in the 09 plan that might be why a lot of those recommendations weren't followed through on. Who's responsible? What's the time frame? And what's the funding source? Is this something that is in the village's capital budget, or is this something that you need to look for grants for, or is this something that's out of your jurisdiction and you need to advocate for, like the example that Frank was just describing? It's something that we typically include in a plan, and it's a good tool so that you can keep track of what we've achieved and what's still out there, and who do we think is the responsible entity, so that you as trustees know, hey, is this on our plate, or is this something that we need to delegate to someone else in the village? But that's something that we definitely want to get into so that we can, hopefully you can check some of these items off.
No, thank you, Simon. And that's I think that's something helpful, not just for the chapter, obviously, for the whole study of the comp plan itself. I think that will be something for the BOT, for the members of the BOT to kind of go back and reflect what are the priorities and how to establish either capital projects or sources of funding for those things, and kind of concentrate depending on what the board wants to concentrate at that time. Do they want to do something in downtown, the waterfront? That I think that'd be very helpful, and it will be a little, to me at least, as a board member, I think will give me a better idea of how to manage our budget at the end of the year, or by the end of the year going forward for next year. If that's something that we would like to invest, and what are the positive negatives of doing step 3 instead of a step 1, you know, so, but that, I appreciate that, the clarification. Thank you.
The one thing I was going to say is I generally agree with the objectives as they're laid out in the draft chapter, but I think one thing that I really liked from one of the earlier chapters, the Waterfront chapter, there was a sidebar that had a selected survey of other selected Hudson River waterfronts and had some really nice pictures and designs. And I really like that. I feel like it's sort of like a vision board that the community can look to marshal support behind an idea. So like, for instance, there's an objective in the transportation chapter about a downtown parking structure. And I agree with Pat that I think that's like a real key thing we need. But the way it's sort of laid out in the comp plan is kind of cold, and it's just, it's lacking sort of that creativity and good design. So maybe we can kind of do a similar sidebar of some really well-designed downtown parking structures from other communities to show, because I think one of the hesitations in the community is we don't want a big, ugly, hulking piece of concrete near, you know, in the downtown, or whether it's even at Brandreth, you know, that's right next to the Aqueduct Trail. And so how does a parking structure integrate into the downtown community feel we have, so we can kind of, you know, as a community envision that in our downtown. So maybe just like some examples of communities of similar density and the type of historical context and how a parking structure can fit into that. And that's just one example. There might be other places to do that in the chapter, but that was one thing that came to mind.
Yeah, thank you. That's, I couldn't agree more with you on parking decks. We can, and I want to thank Jonathan for doing the sidebars on the waterfront. He's on this call. We can do some sidebars on parking. It's the way it's designed, the parking deck or parking garage is designed can really make a world of difference on how successful things are in terms of scale and urban design. And I can understand why people are fearful, because they see so many poorly designed concrete structures. So we can do we can do some sidebars on that and point to some maybe good and bad examples.
Yeah, Frank, let me know. I'd be happy to do that. I have quite a library or catalog of those kind of images that I've collected over the years.
Yep. Thanks, Jeff.
Anything else on transportation? Otherwise, we can jump to the next slide and go through sustainable infrastructure.
Anyone else on the committee have some thoughts, or I mean, if we need more, these are long chapters and may not have had time to go through them just yet. So,
so a lot of the things that I was thinking coming into here have been said, so I don't want to repeat them. But I'll say that what I think works well about this draft is that it's chock full of information. There's a lot of great data that goes in different kinds of formats, from the charts, the graphs, the narratives, the summaries of the previous studies, and I think that's all really, really helpful. The two things that stood out to me, neither one of them is has to do with the content as such, but one is about readability. So I'm curious about who you see as the audience for a piece like this. And this goes for the whole plan, right? Because it's just one chapter in the larger plan. But as I'm reading this, I'm thinking, what is the level of literacy and education that someone needs to have in order to digest a document like this? And it may be that we don't make any changes with respect to that. I'm not saying to water it down or make it more simple, but at the very least, recognizing that there are going to be people that are engaging with this that have varying levels of education. And so I would want someone that is maybe not as steeped in a lot of the details to be able to get a sense of what's going on. It may be that the kind of goal or the introduction is more built out so that you have a kind of 101 or here's what you got to know or executive summary or something like that to this chapter. And that could work for all the chapters, but that's one. And then two is in terms of prioritization, as I was reading this, again, the individual pieces of this are really helpful, but I didn't quite get a sense of, in terms of the priority for these various things, what takes precedent over what. And the reason that that's important is because in arguments that we've had here in the village in the past, let's say with respect to ECPA, one of the things that I would hear referenced is, well, in the Dwarka study, this was the #1 recommendation and this was the #3 recommendation. Now, it may be that that was a prioritized list, or it may just be that that was a list of recommendations and there were numbers next to them, but they weren't prioritized. But people are going to ascribe prioritization whether we want to or not. So I'm curious about whether you feel like this is appropriately prioritized. Those are the two thoughts.
Omar, thanks. I think the short answer is not yet. I think as both Simon and I mentioned, at the end of this, which we're nearing now, we only have 2 other chapters to send you. I think we need to hear from the public, 1, as to what their priorities are. And 2, we did send you the results of the survey. You'll need to look through those and digest those. But we're hoping that after the hearing on the draft, we'll be able to meet with you on just that final prioritization, just the final action plan, have a whole meeting on it. But you've also raised something else, Omar, the readability. Right now, we've probably written more than needs to go in to the whole plan. So let me just take transportation. I'm a big believer in at least data and information so the reader can understand it. But we don't want a transportation chapter ultimately that might be 21 pages. I think this is about 21 pages. If every chapter were 20 pages, you'd have a 200-page plan. And it kind of is not, very few people are going to sit down and read that. So we'll need to create an executive summary probably of some type in the introduction. And then we might put some data, some things in an appendix so that people don't, bog down. It's something, by the way, we're thinking about. We'll need to get to once you see the final 2 chapters and you sort of see what the whole draft looks like. But that's a good point about readability. Some people read it. I think people read today on at least 2 different levels. One, you sort of skim it. You look at what is bold and in color or sidebars, as Jeff mentioned. You get a feel for what it is and what's being communicated. And the other reads it on a more, as you committee members may be doing, is reading it on a full detailed level. So I think you have to be able to have that be read at both levels. And so we're going to have to jointly, I hope, come up maybe in the November meeting and discuss how you want to do that. And the other thing is, keep in mind, this is at this point just a working draft. It's going to go to the trustees who will, take their look at it. And Omar, as I keep mentioning at all these meetings, I'm glad 2 of you are on the board, both boards, because the trustees have to be comfortable with setting. They're the final arbiter, if you will, of the priorities, because the trustees are eventually going to adopt. They're the ones with the power, the ability to adopt it.
So a question came up about the line bike system and whether or not we would, be looking to bring back the line bike system. I wanted to just mention really quickly that the line bike system obviously is gone. I am not sure how much negotiation the village did the last time around to have line bike here, or whether or not it was just that the line bike was sort of in Westchester, like in White Plains and Yonkers and other places, and they ended up here, or if there's an official line bike program here in Ossining. I was wondering if anybody could fill in on that, and whether or not there's any discussions about bringing in one of the other types of systems, like the very deadly looking scooters that exist like in Yonkers, for instance.
There was a, Jaime, there was a pilot program that we did with Line Bike. I believe it was Line Bike. That was, I think I was still, I wasn't working here at the time, but Ossing's kind of challenging because there's a lot of hills. So while biking is definitely something that we want to explore, I know there were issues. We also looked at some scooter, e-bike opportunities, and the hills proved a bit challenging for some of the technology that was available at the time. Maddie, I don't know if I'm forgetting anything.
No, I think they kicked it off with like the car-free day or what have you, that sort of aligned with Earth Day, and they did a 2-week pilot with them. But similar to what happened, I think, in White Plains and other places, they were left all over the place. People weren't terribly careful with, how they left them when they were done using them. And of course the hills, were something, but I mean, they got used, I just, probably unsuccessfully.
Okay. There was another question. So I should mention this, that to the people who are kind of watching out in the audience, generally speaking, this is not a question and answer type of meeting. It's not a public hearing or an open forum. We do answer questions as they come up if they pertain to the discussion. So I'm going to ask this question, but I'm also going to ask that unless the questions are, asking for a little bit more clarity, we don't generally answer a lot of questions in this manner. But there was a question about the parking, whether parking, what type of parking is planned for Sing Sing Prison Museum, and I thought that might correspond a little bit with like the questions of parking for the waterfront. I don't actually know that answer.
Yeah.
There's parking on site there.
Right. Yeah.
It's regular on-site parking? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. I think, Jaime, if a garage was ever built, on a peak weekend for both the park and the museum, that garage, which wouldn't be full of commuters on the weekend, that could serve the museum as well as Engle Park.
Yeah. Great.
Well, here's...
I went on to the sustainable infrastructure.
Yeah. So here's
there was
draft sustainable infrastructure chapter. And by the way, on these first points on water infrastructure, sewer, Joe is on the line from Kellard Sessions. So if there are questions, I think, Joe is here to address them. I think one thing that did come up, just to highlight things briefly and then go back for all of you on questions and discussions, is the fire service. That this is not new to you all. I think you probably know this, but just from the maps that we put in, there's sort of 4 different fire stations downtown. And so it raises a question of, actually, do you need all 4 stations? So that's one thing that Sylvia talked with the fire department and the fire chiefs, and there's an idea that you could possibly consolidate some of those stations downtown. However, there is one station to the north of downtown that might be expanded, and so that is something in the fire service area that probably is important to look at in the future. And on schools, there is, by the way, schools was important element because I think it was pointed out to us early on that Ossining schools have, the school district has for many years been over capacity. And, you know, if development came in, what would be the results of that and what did the future look like? So there's a whole section on schools which goes through the school district's projections for school children, and they have used somebody who, you know, is very heavily relied on by many districts, Western Suffolk BOCES. And that is projecting declining public school enrollment, which really starting next year. And that we had our economist, Tina Lund, look at, and she's projected it out even further given current birth rates and what is happening in Westchester. Ossining, Portchester, one or two other Westchester districts have been over capacity, but other than that, almost every district in the Mid-Hudson and in Westchester County is projecting a similar decline in school enrollments, and it's due to declining birth rates. Birth rates are some of the lowest in American history right now. So just changes in culture and those birth rates are going to alleviate some pressure if school districts' demographers are correct. We believe they are. So then the question is also, you know, if new development came in, what type of development and what school children generation is there due to new development? So we did look at a hypothetical, you can see this dot point here, hypothetical multifamily development downtown of 100 units. You know, would have what developers are looking for today, a mix of primarily 1 and 2 bedroom. And it's that type of development that actually has a positive net impact fiscally on all taxing jurisdictions, but most importantly on the school district, because they produce very few school children. When you think about it, you know, someone looking for a 1 bedroom, they usually don't have children. They're usually a single adult or a couple, or even a 2 bedroom. You usually get families that are looking, families with children are usually looking for, you know, 3 bedroom unit or single family home or a townhome. They're usually not looking for, you know, 1 bedroom apartment. You know, a good example of this is we looked at the Ginsburg development on the waterfront. School district says, and gave us the data that has 16 public school children coming from it. That's a very low ratio per unit. So I think that the schools chapter, we hope, you know, you can take a close look at. We've had a meeting with the school district via Zoom, and we're hoping to have another meeting with a sort of a school subcommittee that's being set up. So those are, I think, are probably important findings because it represents a slight change where, and I noted that on the survey results, which we sent to you, that people thought that, you know, an overcapacity school system was an issue for us, and has been. But if their demographers are correct, it will still be an issue, but it will not be as critical in terms of overcrowding because the projection is for declining enrollment. And then for municipal buildings here, you can see we just consider incorporating sustainable design, energy efficiency. I think there was also some mention of you know, where possible, if some evening meetings could be downtown rather than out on the Parkway. I know that's a scheduling issue. And then the library seems to be in very good shape, but it's to look at expanded services there. So at any rate, Joe, I don't know if you want to mention anything critical on water infrastructure and sewer.
Maybe just to answer some of the questions that were raised at the last meeting. I forgot who brought it up, but someone was questioning we talked about current demand on the water system. Currently about 3 million gallons a day, with the plant capacity at present 4 million gallons a day. All of the upgrades that are currently underway or will soon to be underway are intended to bring that plant capacity to 6.5 million gallons a day. Got some data from the Hazen and Sawyer design report. They're projecting demands of 5.3 million gallons a day at the 2039 design year. So they're projecting more than adequate capacity for the next 20 years with those upgrades.
Right.
There's another question related to.
Hey, Joe.
Yeah.
Just a quick question. This is Pat. Is that an averaged capacity number or is that a peak number?
No, those are averages.
Okay.
Yeah. The peak, the monthly peak was 5.8. That's the projection for the 2039 design year. So still within the planned permitted capacity of 6.5. There's also a question related to sewer. Again, it was regarding capacity. Although, you know, it's a county-owned facility, it's permitted for 7 million gallons a day. Again, that's an average daily flow. And currently they see on the order of 4.9 million gallons per day. I did speak with Associate Engineer at the Department of Environmental Facilities, Marion Pompa, and he had confirmed for me that the county does not have any foreseeable plans to upgrade that facility in the near future. Did also, I questioned him, there was talk about any kind of flood mitigation. He noted that during Sandy, while some of the county-owned facilities did experience some flood damage from the storm, more on the sound side of the county, the Marion plant in particular, he said that there was no flood-related damage at the Ossining treatment plant during Sandy. And there is a county-wide planning study that will be underway shortly, or actually it's in the preliminary stages now, but they will be evaluating all of the county-owned facilities for any necessary flood preventative measures. It doesn't have any specifics for the Ossining plant, but it is part of the study. So, you know, anything that does come out of it would be implemented. I don't have a timeline on it. He didn't have one either. It's in the early stages, and you know, fact finding right now.
Joe, can I ask you a quick question before you continue?
Sure.
So, in regards to thank you. Those are very helpful numbers in regards to the capacity and the treatment plan. So, what happens? I mean, we are upgrading our water system, sure, to accommodate the demand in the near future of potential development. So, since that the county is not thinking on the future, and it seems like the county is not thinking, MTA is not thinking on the future, the state hasn't been thinking on the future, at least when I said those entities, they're not thinking of Ossining, I guess, because we've been fighting with, you know, the state DOT for years. But anyway, so if that's not the case, what alternative do we have if we start seeing in 10 years from now, let's say the demand for the discharge increases from 4 to 6.5? What does that look like for us?
It's a good question. You know, based on the numbers we have for the water demand, you know, the water going out is the water coming out of your distribution systems, the water going into the wastewater treatment. You know, granted, there are the sewer district and the water district bounds are not coterminous, so there is you know, discharge from other areas that aren't necessarily getting water supply from Indian Brook or the Ossining Water District. But the numbers that, for instance, that we just went through with the water projecting out to 2039 are still well within the capacity, the current capacity and permitted capacity of the treatment plant. And those demand numbers, they include fire flow, they include you know, allowances for leakage. So those numbers are, I guess, what the plant would see are not quite the same as what the permitted capacity of a water treatment plant would be, right? Because you're losing some of that water usage to, like I said, to fire flow. And then as we touched on at the last meeting too, to help the plant's capacity on the sewer side, the I&I study that the village is taking initiative in and always looking to remedy is certainly, it goes a long way in maintaining the capacity of the sewer plant and providing that additional capacity for from new development. I don't know if I answered the question completely.
Yes, you did. Definitely. I mean,
I don't know a short answer to tell the county to, go ahead.
no, I know. And that's the struggle, as I've said on this board, that's the struggle that we have, not just with the county, but any other state, facility, I guess, where we're trying to look for stuff for us. And it's very hard for us to get clear answers or just get projects that are helpful for our community. So, but no, thanks, Joe. I appreciate that.
I don't know. Just looking through. I did speak with Fred Cooper, your IT director, since our last meeting. He had provided me with some of his, thoughts and ideas on the current telecommunications and some of the power issues that he sees with the village. For instance, with regard to electricity, backup power right now is available at the operations center and the community center. The municipal building does not have a backup generator or backup power source. In the event of an outage, the municipal building is out. That's certainly something that we would recommend be looked at in the future as part of this plan.
Yes, I would second that.
Secondary energy there.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. That's a really good idea. Thank you.
Of course, with that, generators produce what's called dirty power. So the electrical components, the communication side, the internal workings of the building, computers, email, data systems, telephone systems would probably need to be upgraded to handle that type of power transfer. The power coming off the grid is uniform, it's steady. When you're running it off a generator, you get cycling issues, and it's not as clean as the power coming from Con Ed. So the recommendation would be to provide some backup power, but it's also going to come with some inner workings on the systems themselves. And then his other big, issue was the internet, Wi-Fi, and right now you have Optimum available at all of your village facilities. Fios, Verizon Fios, which would be a nice secondary system or backup, right now it's available at the municipal building, but it's not active there. It's available at the community center. It's in the area, but it's not installed in the community center. And as far as he knows, there were no long-term plans to ever have Fios at the operations center. I think it's just too far of a run from any of their nearest services. So it would be nice to have that as a secondary option. The SCADA system, for instance, for Indian Brook Treatment Plant at the operations center, if you lose Optimum service, you lose that system. Go back on. It doesn't mean that the plant stops operating. It just means that the remote operations and the ability to monitor that plant goes away. So some of the niceties that come with redundancy don't exist at the municipal buildings. Let's see. I think that was really it. Yeah. I don't know if you have any questions with any of that.
No, thank you, Joe, for the summary. I guess, yeah, if there's just any general questions on sustainable infrastructure chapter, and if not, we would just, we've got 2 chapters to highlight for you.
Can I ask a question regarding, I know on the library section, it has the expanding services there. And I'm wondering, has, the broader feedback on, I know we're talking about condensing parking and having garages, and I'm thinking, the way the library is right now, there's barely enough parking when there's a special event or several events going on there. And so I think that's something to consider in tandem with the expansion of services at the library, is that there would have to be some type of evolution of the parking availability up there as well, if we seek to increase the traffic flow in that area, or the patrons that, go through the library in the area. That's just something, I guess, that's standing out, in addition to the other things on the slide as well to me. That theme of parking, as we know, it keeps coming up, but with something like the library, it's definitely most prominent, because even as it stands right now, it's very limited for the options, especially with some of the older patrons. There's very limited, handicap spaces and spaces closest to the building and things like that as it is. So just throwing that out there as food for thought.
No, thank you. And Sylvia in our office, I know, talked with the library. I don't know if that issue came up, Sylvia, or I presume it probably did, but I don't know.
Yeah, she said that there is shortage when a lot's going on at the library. So maybe, more than one program at a time, kind of like in the evenings, weekday evenings. But yeah, she didn't mention anything in particular. She actually mentioned like a little bit of conflict between the business next door. The patrons may park into the library parking lot.
Yeah.
So she highlighted that too. And it's more, more than taking up spaces, is also a safety issue, because there's no sidewalk on the library driveway, in the entrance, basically, where all the cars get into the parking lot.
Right. And just in general, I know, speaking about bringing in the public perspective into the conversation, I noticed that a lot of the results, well, actually the number one concerning issue around development, surprisingly, was parking. Not surprisingly, but I guess in looking at school capacity, fell second only to parking and traffic, right? So I think that's a very real concern that, that already exists. And as we begin to expand options, we'll have to be more creative with thinking about how the parking around those options look. So just an FYI.
I think, one thing to keep in mind about the sort of like the things that we can do and the things we can't do anything about, parking, obviously, as we go about zoning, is something that we do have a lot of control over. Traffic, however, as you saw with the numbers, sort of the transportation trip numbers that are generated on Route 9 and 9A, most of those cars are not from Ossining. And so Route 9 being probably the worst traffic place, I think, for most people as they drive through the village. It's important to keep in mind that if we add another few units, even if it's near the Route 9 corridor, the bulk of the traffic that you have there really isn't from Ossining at all. It's from the adjacent municipalities at the end of the day. People who are trying to get through Ossining to get, from one place to another. So, where I think that the concern about parking, school district is a little bit more directly tied to the actions that the village does. The traffic one, is not as so discreetly tied to what we do, because if they were, if adjacent municipalities started adding up, more need for volume on the edge of our district, we would still be affected by those transportation issues. Whereas if we put a building in a block on, Broad Street, there's not going to be parking on Broad Street, but it's not necessarily going to cause, parking problems in Terrytown. If that makes any sense.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I guess just if there's any other comments, questions on the sustainable infrastructure chapter.
This is just a general one. It's kind of
Yeah, Pat.
And I guess this is really for probably Jaime and Karen. Has there been they talked a little bit about, there's no backup generator at the Village Hall and some of the other places. Has there ever been sort of a semi-comprehensive sort of risk management review, kind of like an ERM view of
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there has. So we're actually revisiting that now. So both from a technology point of view and a facilities point of view.
Okay, all right, that's helpful. It's a separate question, but some of that would leak into this. It seems like from a sustainable perspective and so.
I mean, we certainly found that in terms of telecommunications, Wi-Fi access, that there were a lot of problems with this last storm, as most of you know, and then also through the pandemic with the lack of access to Wi-Fi for so many families who now are homeschooling their kids and things like that. So on many different levels, these are things we're just going to have to keep revisiting, especially as technology changes and our needs change so dramatically.
Yeah, it would seem from what you're saying and from what Joe mentioned and Annie was asking, what are some priorities that you could effectuate yourselves, that certainly backup power for the municipal building might be one of them. I know so many municipalities are looking at that.
Yeah, and I would think even just thinking really some out of the box stuff, what happens if a tree falls on the OVAC building, right? And it knocks out, takes out a couple of the ambulances, what's the backup there? And,
we did have tree fall on employee cars here at Croton Avenue. So that is not, these are things that keep us up at night. These are not things, these are things that actually could happen.
Yep, exactly. That one or the other ones that I was thinking about, well, just while walking, what happens if the reservoir gets contaminated, right? 4 million gallons somewhere else.
Well, the water treatment plant, and I know Joe can speak to this too. I mean, we have the backup plans for the water treatment plant that we're mandated to have, but also that we would have regardless, are pretty thorough. But we do live in a world where you really can't even contemplate what the next disaster might be. So we're constantly trying to stay ahead of that curve to the degree that's humanly possible. But yeah, all of those things are extremely pressing problems. And I think all municipalities are struggling with that.
That's great.
No,
that's good. That's great. That's great to hear, right? In terms of the village is on top of that and thinks about that sort of stuff on a regular basis. I kind of figured that was the answer, but I just never had heard anyone specifically talk about some of that stuff. So thanks.
No problem.
Good.
Just, well, never mind.
Go ahead, sorry.
No, I mean, if we want to move on, that's fine. I just was noticing that also, when we don't have to really unpack it tonight, but I think it's a great discussion to revisit around, when we talk about the section on tax revenue. I know you have it there on the slide that the net benefit would be appropriately scaled, multifamily residential developments, and then but there's also the commercial aspect of tax revenue that I think we are exploring as a committee, but also I think warrants a discussion at some point, what the options around that are. I know looking at the results, the poll results, that's, you know, variety of options as far as commercial and shopping and things of that nature are already, I guess, things that at least those that responded to the survey are looking for. And so I'm just curious as to, you know, us kind of weighing those two options of tax revenue sources and, you know, because there are the concerns that go, you know, people have around residential development. And then there's the concerns that people have about lack of, you know, commercial options as well that already exist. So I'm just wondering, as far as the slide goes, when it's saying that, you know, residential development would be, am I interpreting that right, the best source of tax revenue, or just
No, I don't think that it's a, so I'm going to try to answer this. So I would say that I don't believe that there's an attempt or even really a happiness about saying that residential multifamily properties are probably the easiest path towards generating property tax revenue above and beyond the expenses. I think that, you know, we can probably all agree that there's some sadness in the fact that small retail is dying. And so as small retail is dying, it becomes much more difficult to justify the construction of new small retail, and where, you know, even big box stores now have been for some years prior to COVID were also dying. So it makes it even more difficult to build new big box stores and new retail. And so while I think there's a general agreement that, you know, a retail building that has nothing but retail or nothing but office is built on a sort of a built road and isn't going to add to the infrastructure costs of the municipality, is not going to yield any school children, and therefore it's going to generate property taxes that are going to help everybody. Unfortunately, the development community is not super interested in bringing those kinds of projects forward. I mean, I think even here in Ossining, I know there's a project that I spoke to the owner just yesterday about building a brand new self-storage on Highland Avenue. And, you know, there's not a lot of jobs associated with self-storage. There's not even a lot of property tax that's associated with a self-storage facility, but those facilities exist and they do get used. And while it'd be nice to have something that's generating a lot more sales tax revenue, it's becoming increasingly difficult, not just in Ossining, but across the country. And so looking at multifamily housing has, despite, I think, the assertions of, you know, people out in the public and in pretty much every community, they have shown to be a net positive taxpayer. But it was important here when Urbanomics put together that study, it was important to hone in on whether or not that's specifically accurate. And so what Urbanomics did, what BFJ did, was put together a actual hypothetical building that looked at the cost of construction for that building. It looked at the amount of revenue that they could generate in rents based off of average rents. It looked at the amount of taxes that would be generated based off of the assessments, the assessor's sort of taxation, property tax numbers, and then it looked at the specific costs associated that's paid by property tax by the school district for children, as well as other municipal costs. And it was able to come up with, you know, based off of average numbers that are generated in a sort of generic 100-unit multifamily, that a certain amount of money above the cost of services that would be provided, how much tax revenue would be generated. And so that's how they came up with that information. But it's not really it's not like a sort of a statement that, hey, this is the greatest thing in the world, as much as it's more of a evaluation of the real options that are in front of us and what those impacts would be.
Yep, no, I appreciate you putting that into context. I know we kind of touched on that discussion you just pointed out earlier in the meeting days of the committee. And so I appreciate you kind of revisiting that and putting it all into context. And I think if, people are looking at the slide, it's interpreted one way, and then it's, it's just helpful to see all the angles from that and how a certain decision is arrived, how we arrive at that certain decision of best case scenario or best option, or however you look at it. So thank you for that.
Well, okay, I think then, I think we'll try to go through, just highlight this section, the next two chapters. And these are just to, get your input and comments. These chapters really are not written yet. We've started the drafts of them. We will, as you know, with the committee, we like to do is go through the next two chapters, kind of just get a preview of things. We haven't decided on things yet, and to get your input. So housing and neighborhood preservation is the next chapter, which we hope after this meeting we would then finish writing up and get to you prior to the October 20th meeting. So just you can see here an overall goal. Your current 2009 plan has sections on housing and then sections on neighborhood quality in another chapter, and we've put them into this chapter. So again, here we're just saying that the diversity, which came out in the survey also that we sent to you, enhances quality of life in the village. Different types of housing that serve different groups of people and people in different stages of their lives. You've got probably most of your housing in terms of land area is single family, but you also have mixed income, multifamily housing in various neighborhoods, some of the T zones, and some of the areas around transit. So I think there's an emphasis on both improving conditions of existing housing, and then also where it's appropriate, developing the type of housing that Jaime just went over with you from the previous slide. And then to create a balance between new market rate, housing, and then affordable housing strategies, so that you can continue to have a viable, very, good, solid neighborhoods with different housing choices. So I think you can see our question. What do you think? Just to get a discussion going here, if there's most critical issues in the housing market that anyone wants to highlight, or if you think this introduction sort of gets at some of them.
I would like to just kind of maybe not start on the bigger concept, but Jaime, help me out on this one, because I want to bring up one of the topics that we at the HPC Historic Preservation Commission meeting. It came out last night, and I think as an overall, if we're looking for on a house and a neighborhood preservation, I think we should look into this as well. So there's several churches around the village of Austin that either are landmark, or they're very they have an architectural details that we would like to maintain. Some of them are struggling to survive. Many of them are closing down. They're trying to figure it out, what are the next steps for them to do. A lot of them are either in a T zone or an S zone, depending on what the location are. So how do we, one of the conversations that we were having last night, or the commission was having last night, is how do we preserve them? And is there options for us to preserve the character of the church? Let's say if someone sells the church, what are the options in there? And that Stuart, you're here. Okay, yeah, Stuart's here still, and Q was there last night. So I think that I think the general overall question, and maybe Jaime, you want to add something to it. So different options on different zones, different criterias of the use of the future use of a church or a temple. What could we do as part of this chapter? Or is it this chapter the appropriate chapter, or is it something else where we should be addressing this situation in Austin and going forward?
You know what? I've already queued this conversation up earlier today, so maybe I'll hand it off to Frank.
Manny, the easy part of your question is that it's the next chapter on cultural facilities, which would include churches, where we had a nice conversation with Jaime earlier today on this very issue, and I think that should be a important element of the cultural facilities chapter, which includes churches as part of it. But one thing we discussed today is trying to, there's a long track record both in New York City and here in Westchester, in the different villages and towns where churches, there has been, as you know, some consolidation, for instance, of some churches, and there has been other churches where they don't have the vibrant, or large numbers of congregations that they used to, and they might close or might be currently vacant, that to allow them to, and it might be a special permit procedure, but to allow them to apply for uses that, for instance, cultural uses, other cultural uses, or residential uses, or underlying uses that are allowed in the zone that they're in. The one reason we like a special permit is it gives a little bit of overseeing of it by the planning board, and that is usually helpful, because if you're going to rehabilitate a facility, by giving it choices for uses that are marketable, that's the best way, I think, to save the facility. Because as soon as a facility, we've been so involved with this, with people who've worked with the village before, like Steve Tilley. As soon as a church starts to not be maintained, the roof starts to leak. You get sort of the winter where it's not heated. If you can't intervene, or I should say the sooner you intervene, or the church can get an entity that's interested in reusing it, the more expensive it's going to get to rehabilitate it over time. So I think that here, the village could be proactive in this area of trying to help the whoever is the owner of that facility get it to be in a useful, marketable use is the best way to preserve it and to preserve the overall entity. Otherwise, you get what has happened in some areas, and I'll just cite some experience we've had actually with the state agency that we happen to do some work in, and they had a facility that they had not maintained, and they said, we just don't have the money to refurbish it, and we don't have the money to tear it down. And we realized that, the policy of benign neglect will lead to a worse situation where the facility becomes a hazard, a safety hazard, and then it's too expensive to rehab. So I think a positive intervention through, not intervention, a positive just support of those facilities through zoning and through allowing them the underlying uses that are available in that zone, or to use uses through a special permit process that the planning board deems, or the village board deems appropriate uses. That would be very helpful to them.
No, I agree with you, Frank. But all those changes and all those special permits language, it has to be part of that specific. It has to be part of an S75. It has to be part of a S50 or a T-zone. Or do you think it will be just because soon as that religion you know, as soon as the church is sold, it's not a church anymore. The building used to be a church, but now the use of that particular property could be anything else. So how do we define that that element or that building through our zones? I understand it could be, we could be addressing that in the culture and religious portion, but I think it's also essential for us to link it back into the different zones that we have here in the village as well.
Yeah, I think one area to start that I've seen other communities do is immediately say, look, you can rehab this facility for whatever use is currently allowed in your zone. So let's take the T-zone. Well, you have housing, you have residential as a use, and that would be a use that could be allowed. Now, you may want to go further, and where you want to go further to allow, for instance, a church to become another cultural facility, you have to see if that or an arts center, you have to see if that is allowed in the zone. If it's not allowed in the zone, then we might, and I have to, we'd have to talk this through with Jaime and Stuart, whether that could be allowed for the rehabilitation of historic structures. And so you might have a section on historic structures, structures that are eligible for the state historic preservation designation, and allow a special permit process for, the church to become an art facility or another cultural facility or a residential facility.
Do you have examples of other municipalities that have done something similar to that effect?
Yeah, I think we could, if you don't, one thing I could do, just because we do a lot of work with them, Steve Tilley also is a great resource because, well, one, he's worked for you, Paul, and we do a lot of work with him. So I could probably give you some sidebars, if you will.
Yes, yes, please.
Yes, yeah, we could do that.
Okay, that'll be great. Thank you.
Okay. Well, just on this slide, we just wanted to give you an overview, really, from the census data. This won't be a surprise to anybody. Your greatest single residential use or housing use lies in your single-family residential neighborhoods with about 2,500 parcels, and then it goes down from there, although the density increases from there to 2-family, 3-family, multifamily. So I think the housing chapter will try to incorporate both strategies of, for instance, the 2009 plan had a whole sidebar on neighborhood conservation areas and just maintaining neighborhoods as much as possible, maintaining the tax base, and maintaining just the livelihood, safety, the quality of life in the neighborhoods, but also then looking at other issues in terms of affordability, for instance. So it always, we think it helps to start with what is the existing housing mix. This is it in terms of data. The next slide, though, goes into some key trends. We discussed, some of us discussed this Saturday in the walking tour. As you know, right now, I think there's a short-term trend, perhaps, which has been reported by different real estate publications, and I'm sure the real estate community in your area too. The COVID-19 has resulted in a sort of a relook by many residents of whether they really want to have a home office, work out of their home. And it means that people are looking, and we're hearing this from developers we're working with, real estate companies, that people are looking for single family homes, which provide some open space and enough room for a home office. And we've been told by some real estate agents in the area that, these are, there's a lack of enough, there's a lack of supply of these. And it's sort of putting, I think for sellers a healthy price, the prices are slightly increasing. So this is where the market right now, COVID-19 has put a blip, if you will. We don't know how long this trend will continue, but it's certainly put an increase in housing prices and on the primarily the single family housing market, and also to some extent in Westchester, the townhouse market, where people are looking for, individual entrances to their home. They don't have to take an elevator. They're not in a parking structure. They park their car outside. That type of thing. So it does represent a shift a little bit. How long term it is, because obviously there will be, well, we hope there will be, I think most scientists believe there will be some type of vaccine to the COVID-19. So whether this lasts into 2022 or 2023, we're not sure. But there is this pressure now on the single family housing market. I think, though, that it will stabilize and there'll be continued interest in also multifamily and areas around a train station, for instance. But this is a trend we wanted to just mention to you. I think, Sylvia, yeah, this just, the other issue, which is not new, it's an issue that the 2009 plan went over, and I think all of you know this. It's an issue not just in Ossining, but practically it's an issue in effect all over Westchester. And that is what economists call the housing cost burden. In your case, you can see here that what we define that is, or census data is looking at, is renters and homeowners that are paying more than 30% of their household income on housing costs. In effect, if you look at this in a place like, just to set a tone, if you look at this in a place like Brooklyn, until COVID hit anyway, you would find young people paying 50% of their income on housing. So this is an issue all over. But here's the data for Ossining, for the village and compared to the town. Both you can see for renters and for owner-occupied units, over half of both are really cost burdened if you use 30%, which the 30% goes back to the HUD, Department of Housing and Urban Development definitions of the Reagan era. It's been in place in the federal government a long time. I think in Westchester, this is throughout Westchester. We find this, but it's an issue, and it's a key issue for the village. Just another one we're just I'm going to highlight these very quickly. Overcrowding can be an issue in terms of numbers of people per room. We think it is a bit of an issue in particularly some of your renter occupied older units, particularly places like the T-zone, have had some of these issues. So it's an issue to look at in the housing chapter. And then next, I think here, we just wanted to look at, just give you a sense of, we look for, by the way, for the school district outside of the village, there were really no projects within the school district that were of any size, anything above 15 units that are projected within the school district boundaries, like in Briarcliff Manor or Yorktown or, Chapel in Newcastle. But here you've got, Harbor Square, you all know, is built, and 147 Main Street, there's two that have been approved, as you can see here, but not built and are on hold. And then there's the DPW site, which there's a proposal for. And actually, we visited that site on our walking tour of the waterfront. And the next slide just gives you.
Hey, Frank?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Can you go back to the previous slides, please?
Yes, yep.
So I know it means probably nothing, but it's actually Hudson Crest now. It's not Hudson Steps anymore.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know. At least for now, it's Hudson Crest.
All right.
Name can change, obviously, but for accuracy at this point. The other one is, you have Harbor Square, but where's Avalon? Do you select the projects from a year perspective?
Yeah, actually, probably, I guess in this one, we thought Avalon, we didn't consider Avalon kind of quite as new, but we could certainly, I don't know the dates of Avalon's completion, actually. I thought it was over,
It's pretty new as well.
Older, and I
Just a-
think we've had this conversation. Avalon sort of missed the cutoff. The other one that's missing though is 80 Main Street, which I want to say is about 30 units. That's the one where the wall fell, so it's built.
oh, right, yeah.
I don't know what we call that. Is that on hold or where? I don't know.
That's like it's vacant. I don't know what to
hold it.
I don't know how we describe that. Yeah.
I think that's called purgatory.
You know.
So, Karen, can you,
Perhaps limbo.
what was the year cutoff for you guys? What was the thinking on that one?
I don't.
5 years probably, right?
Yeah, I don't know the exact cutoff date we used, but certainly we should put 80 Main Street in, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Then, we just, I don't want to go into too much detail. I know you've had a whole series of studies, past meetings on affordable housing policy, but it creates a framework for the village to look at this issue, and you have an affordable housing code, and it as many codes in Westchester is based to some extent on the county's affordable housing model. So I think it's something that you have, and it's a program that we should address in the housing chapter and make sure that your desire to maintain it and look at other ways also to achieve affordable housing. And then Sylvia, I think the next one is on, just in this vein of the affordable housing policy, your landlord-tenant relations council, the programs that it has, we want to try to summarize some of those in the housing chapter. And the next slide is on something that I think has been used. I just wanted to mention, I think our experience in some other communities, particularly since the law has been changed on the use of housing voucher programs in Westchester. My understanding of it is that, and this is fairly recent with the new county executive, that someone with a housing voucher cannot be denied, renting a unit simply because it's a housing voucher. And so that could make a housing choice voucher program, and I know there's limits money-wise on this, but it could be very effective, and I think it is in many communities, a very effective.
We have one.
Yes, you do. That's what I know, Karen. I was just, by the way, I didn't want to sound like I was, in other words, what I want to say about it is your current program, if you probably have a very a good ability to use this program in the future, provided funding is available. It's even more effective now that the county's made that change. And by the way, we also, I think many housing people will tell you, we ran into this in Harrison, that this is a far more effective way to reach more people who are rent burdened than a 10% set aside in a new multifamily building, because for the same amount of money, you can get a lot more vouchers and you can help a lot more people. So I think Ossining has very good choices. You have this housing voucher program, plus you have a set aside in new construction. So you have some good options. Yeah, sorry, I was just trying to praise your current program and say I think it has more potential.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood, but
Yeah.
no, it's a great program.
Yeah. So, and then the IFCA, providing property management, supportive services. I think housing is more than providing affordable housing is more than just about the bricks and mortar. It's really about also some supportive services. And then the next slide, I think, goes into just some of your previous studies. You just pointing out the housing vacancy rate, the census data anyway. So this is a little bit dated, but it's housing vacancy rate. Your housing vacancy rate is about 3%. So that is fairly tight housing market. As I'm not saying anything new there. And we went through, we'll highlight this in the report, some previous studies. We think Kevin Dworka, did a very certainly thorough quantitative, analysis of housing. So in 2017, so we have a good basis for this chapter for some of the things you've looked at already, and we'd like to build on that. And then the next slide just goes through your housing policy technical papers, which we'll go through, and what they said, as we did, for instance, in the transportation chapter, what previous studies you've got. And then the next slide really is the more I wanted to get to is just the issues and opportunities. I think we've discussed in the past, and I think, again, you allow accessory dwelling units in single family areas. We've been looking at how the T-zone works and how multifamily could work in this regard. I know you've had past discussions of ETPA, and those will probably continue. But I think what we wanted to look at is some trade-offs between increasing affordable housing set-asides and increasing development incentives. Again, I mentioned, I think, the housing voucher programs, an excellent way to reach a wider housing audience than just a set-asides. And so to use the programs in a comprehensive way. And then, by the way, I wanted to get to this end. We're working with Jaime on this to create opportunities for what planners call a missing middle sometimes. Asning, by the way, this is what they mean by that is the between a single family unit and a big apartment building. There's sort of this sometimes just low rise, low scale housing like townhomes. 3, 4, 5-story homes. Obviously, you have the T-zone, but we're looking at sort of a multifamily. You have a multifamily 1 and multifamily 2 zone, and those tend to be, they allow fairly big buildings. We're kind of looking at this MF3 zone, and we'll be getting something to the trustees on this, which the committee will see, is to allow more of a low density. Not higher than 3 stories, more of a lower density, townhouse style approach to some housing in key areas that might be appropriate for it, corridors or sections adjacent to downtown. So those are some issues and opportunities. The one at the end here is from the 2009 plan, and that is, it gets back to the idea of also trying to make sure that your current single-family neighborhoods are not forgotten, that they're important, and they represent the majority of your housing stock, and to make sure that we don't we continue actually trying to focus on those neighborhoods and make sure that they're kept up. So that's the sort of issues and opportunities we saw. Maybe I should stop there.
Yeah, no, thank you, Frank, and I'm not sure. I apologize. I've been grabbing a lot of your time, but can you just, I have 2 sort of clarifications on this, and probably Stuart can help me as well. So I'm not kind of clear on the continuation of discussion of ETPA details. We do have an ETPA law that was passed in 2018, I believe. And in 2017, 2019, we actually modified the ETPA where we allow developers or buildings, I guess, existing buildings that felt under the ETPA regulations, if they wanted to opt out, we actually give them the option to opt out by allowing those 20% set aside units to go to a different IMI percentage of that. So if we are putting information in here, I think we should add that into the language, into the verbiage of this information about affordable housing as well.
Okay, yeah, and in a way, we see the ETPA as really more of a, not necessarily a long-term comprehensive plan issue as much as an operating, in other words, a policy.
We have that policy already.
And that's what I'm,
yeah.
Yeah, and maybe we let it go at that. You have a policy in place, and unless there's a reason to reopen it, we don't have to.
No. Okay.
Okay.
Could you just explain a little bit more about like the concept of a neighborhood preservation district?
Yeah, it's, by the way, the 2009 plan has a page with a sidebar on it, and we've seen it in other communities. I haven't talked to the authors of the 2009 plan on this. One of them I know fairly well, John Shapiro. And I can do that, Jeff. I wanted to put it in because we felt there may be, this may be a good idea in terms of where we've seen it is in neighborhoods that they might have a cohesiveness of design or architecture, but they're not necessarily historic, or they might not qualify to be, for instance, nominated to by SHPO, or the State Historic Preservation Office. But they might have qualities about them that are very distinctive or worthwhile, and neighborhoods may want to may want to be in a district where there is some further I don't want to use the term control, but just further guidance in terms of updating, rehabbing buildings, but not something that would require an historic district, not something that requires a commission or anything, but and also an area where if certain things are done in rehab, there might be low interest loans to people. That type of issue. It really comes out of your 2009 plan, but if you think it's worth it, we wouldn't mind exploring that idea a little bit.
Okay, yeah, I'll go back and I'll dive into the 2009 plan a little bit. And
yeah,
yeah.
You will find it that in the 2009 plan. Correct me, Sylvia. I think you'll find it under their last chapter on quality of life. It's not in their housing chapter.
I think so.
Yeah, so that's where you can find it. Right. Okay, maybe we can go. I don't want to take too much time. Maybe we can quickly. And Sylvia, let me turn this to you on the cultural facilities.
Thank you, Frank. So next chapter, I'm going to talk about cultural historic resources, and I'm conscious of the time, so I'll try to make it simple and fun. I guess it's a little more of a lighter topic, I guess, but very important. And we had several discussions with members of the subcommittee, actually two subcommittees, one about more like historical resources, and one was more about community organizations. So some of the ideas that you will see in the slides are taken from, on the ground experience of these leaders, community leaders that we spoke to during one of our subcommittees, and also some ideas from the Ideas Wall and Interactive Map, so the two online engagement tools that were open to the public, and the public had some great ideas, so I wanted to show a few of them. So just as an introduction, I guess an overarching goal here written, it's support the growing number of cultural organizations in Ossining, and make the village a regional attraction for the arts and culture scene, promote tourism, and continue protecting the many of the village historic resources that you really have plenty of those. So each bullet point will have a slide. So I will, dive more into that later, but just to highlight a few opportunities that came out from this subcommittee meeting, and just even from the previous, the 2009 plan. One was, I guess, an issue and opportunity. So there is not much collaboration among entities and cultural organizations currently. So I guess one opportunity is to promote more collaboration and highlight local artists. Second one is identify and support a coordinating entity. So very much tied to the first point here. That will harmonizes and these multiple events that at this point are going on in Ossining, I guess, except during this time of COVID-19, and even like promoting these events through a calendar, advertising outside the village and into the region. Third point here is exploring strategies to promote more of a maker economy, which is kind of like a new concept the last few years. Many more communities are trying to promote these arts and culture scene by providing spaces for artists to have their workshops and just to showcase their work. And the last one here is consider adaptive reuse projects for historic and architecturally relevant buildings. And we touched upon while Manny was saying about the churches into the village that otherwise may go into disrepair. And just as a discussion starter, I put a question at the bottom of the slide. And in your opinion, what are the historic and cultural assets that have the most potential to attract people from the region to Ossining? And if anyone has any ideas, please share.
One question I had is, given the Sing Sing Museum now having a reality to it, do you feel that has, it seems to have, some potential to really attract some people to Ossining?
I think absolutely. And you look at other Hudson River communities, like just for instance, Dia in Beacon, having a large cultural institution that's available to people who want to come by train. It would be right at the train station, and I think that it ties in with one of our other extremely important cultural or historic assets or geographic assets, and that's our waterfront. And I think that cultural events at the waterfront, finding ways to continue to promote those, and we have one of the most beautiful waterfronts of maybe anywhere in the world, depending on who you ask. So I think that making the waterfront a place where we continue to have cultural events and find ways to tie in, the arts community and things like that, we should leverage that asset as much as we can.
Great.
Well, I wanted to ask you, Jeff, just as a follow-up question to that. I know, obviously I've mentioned it a few times. I worked in Yonkers, downtown waterfront before I came here. And one of the things they did in Yonkers some years back was they built a stage, but it also had sort of like these small grandstands that could fit about 300 people. So if you wanted to put up a concert there, it was pretty much ready to go, right? You just sort of plugged in your speakers, You had seating, you had stands, and if you wanted to increase the number of seating, when I was running the show, we had up to 700 people at a concert there, which is a pretty big concert. And the spillover impact of that was that a lot of those people would leave the concert and go directly to restaurants in the neighborhood. So the correlation here in Austin is not exact, but while there is a bit of a stage, there is some other, infrastructure pieces that are missing to use it as more of a ongoing venue, I think. Do you think that that's like a missing element, or do you think that the sort of the stage is set up is perfectly conducive to the kind of events that you think need to take place on the waterfront? Or
yeah, I think there's an opportunity to do that. The one thing is that there's the crossover and ownership at Engle Park with the town, but I do think that if it's us working with the town to do that or whatever, to make, I think that I could see something like that. We'd have to think about design wise, placement wise, where's the right place and way to do that. But I think that there is a possibility for that. And I do think when we're talking about, how do these things tie into economic development? Most of we have one or two restaurants at the waterfront, and we have now an ice cream stand. But I think that as we look at other ways we want to, the future of the waterfront, that, tying all these things together. So, a museum like the Sing Sing Prison Museum, expanding concerts, and potentially growing other businesses at the waterfront, whether it's, maybe it's just to the other side of the train tracks, some opportunities there to kind of create, what you're suggesting is sort of the spillover from the cultural events into the local businesses. So yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunities there.
Well, there's another thing that I don't know. Has anybody here ever been to Smorgasburg?
Oh, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So Smorgasburg is, for those who don't know what it is, it's like 100, I believe it's around 100, exactly 100 different food vendors that sort of line up in a park in Williamsburg. And so the sort of the infrastructure aspect to that is that there's a whole row, like a line of people that require electricity to run what they're doing. So there are plenty of people who come up and they just need, sort of cold space, and they don't really need that electricity. But there are other vendors who go there. And so certain vendors pay specifically a special fee, which I think they pay to the city to provide the electrical output that they need in order to produce what they're doing. Because otherwise, the energy generation has to be done by gas-fired generators, which may not always be something that you want to do. And so for the waterfront, whether it's in Engle Park or it's in the Village Park, which the name escapes me right now, I apologize. It's Henry Gordine Park. The accommodations for something like that seem like they're kind of lacking at this point. And so I don't know if it's the right setup right now to kind of bring those kinds of smaller scale festivals, not 100 vendors necessarily, but even if you wanted to bring in 30 vendors or 40 vendors, you would probably encounter some challenges in terms of how to support them. So that's maybe, another thing that, and I know this has nothing to do with cultural and historic research. It may be cultural a little bit, but it's whether there's the infrastructure to support those kinds of events over the long run, and whether there's a desire to accommodate those kinds of infrastructure expenses that would allow events like that to take place on a more consistent basis moving forward. It's just kind of food for thought right now.
Yeah. Okay.
I agree with that, because last year there wasn't a huge number, but they would have on Friday nights, right down there at Lewis Engle, they would have 5 or 6 food trucks come down with just the local kind of artists up on the stage, and there was a great turnout. right? I think so. I think there's,
Yeah.
you know, as a concept, that's something that's fresh in the area's mind, and something that, you know, there would be the opportunity to expand on that. So.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, maybe Sylvia, there's just a few more slides on this.
Yeah, I'll move to the next because I'm getting a little bit more in detail in each bullet point that you just saw. So part of the cultural resources, part of the chapter, it's also community groups and services. We want to cover what the community really leans into, Hudson Link, Neighbors Link, Open Door. I think we spoke with most of the leaders of these community groups. So it was a good discussion that we had a couple of months ago. And also religious groups. We know that there is a high Portuguese and Spanish-speaking community in Austin. So some of these religious groups are very important for some communities. And I guess when I head to the top, you can see that there are more of like cultural resources or theater groups. They're really growing in the last, we've heard that in the last 5 years, Austin really experienced a boom in cultural events, whether there were performances on the river or in general, like theater groups that are just, locating in Austin. And one is on the waterfront is the Westchester Collaborative Theater that is very active. Now online, but in the past, they had events every weekend, and theater it's just two of them. I didn't want to have a comprehensive list, and also obviously the Sin Prison Museum is one of those others. And in terms of challenges, what we heard, it's a little bit of disconnection between different communities, and this is a challenge that some villages are experiencing. So maybe we can think about ways to bring together different communities into perhaps a sort of a mix and match event where there are different things going on and they may attract different sides of the community. So it just, again, food for thought. We are just still digging into this chapter. In terms of historic resources, I think Jonathan already mentioned in the land use and zoning presentation that there are two historic districts in Austin. One is downtown and the other one is Sparta. These other dots on the map, hopefully you can see them. They are the structures or sites included in the National Historic Register. Obviously, there are just a handful of them, but there are so many more structures that deserve attention. And I guess we passed many of them during our walk last Saturday, and we can recognize them through also the Museum in the Streets sign that they were added, I guess, in the past 10 years, which is a nice way to just talk about the history of these historic resources, and even architecturally relevant, even if they're not historic per se. Again, on historic preservation, we really want to highlight that these historic resources should be leveraged and should be helped to stay here, and try to find funding for preservation in terms of funding from the state, from SHPO, other type of grants. They may come also federal historic tax incentives. There are a number of these options that were also listed in the 2009 plan, and we kind of want to review the list of these funding sources to update to 2020 options, I guess. And in the picture, there is a clear example of one of the buildings that just recently received the grant, 200 Main Street, received the grant for, I guess, unnecessary works. Karen, I think, mentioned in one of the previous meetings. And this is an example of one of those buildings that has so much potential. It's at the entrance of Main Street, kind of like the entrance to downtown. And so hopefully there will be, it's currently vacant. So long that I know, my understanding was that it's not used currently. So it's one example of these buildings that should be leveraged, and hopefully we can find a way to do that. And in my orange box, I put like sort of a question for you all. Why these historic buildings remain vacant? And we've seen a number, and you know, I think Jaime mentioned one church this morning that, again, it's one of these examples of beautiful buildings that don't really find a different use. So open up to comments on this. I believe Jeff may have some insight in this, or Manny as well.
I don't know the answer to this question, so sorry.
I think from all that I've heard, there's a long and sordid history to each one of these issues. You know, it's funny. There is a bunch of these different older buildings that have gotten to a point of disrepair. I think that what you talked about, Frank, earlier is sort of benign neglect. Kind of led a lot of these buildings. 200 Main is probably one of them that just sort of led to this point where it became so expensive to repair it, and also so expensive to demolish it, and expensive to, you know, sort of like culturally expensive to even consider getting rid of it, so that you're sort of boxed in for 200 Main Street. And again, I don't know the whole story of it, but I do know that it's in a massive state of disrepair, which is why I believe, Maddie, you were the one who was able to get that grant. No, okay.
Can't take credit. That's before my time.
Okay.
We got the grants in last year's, they were last year's CFA round, before Maddie started, but it's a remediation grant. So right now there's contamination in the building, asbestos and mold. It's a great space. And then the church right behind it is you know, right now, I think that congregation is struggling what to do about their declining numbers and the enormous amount of work that needs on the steeple and within the building itself. So, you know, there's a lot of potential here. It's a lot of money probably. And if somebody wants to sell you a building for $1, don't take it. Because I think that's how the village got it. So do not take it. It's a trick. So, but it's you know, I think that if with the remediation, with some of the things we're doing, if we address the parking, if we, you know, some of the plans for the Route 9 redevelopment would increase the frontages on some of these properties that abut Route 9 and create more space for outdoor dining and things like that. So there's really a lot of potential. And I think rather than looking at them as individual projects, when you look at them in a compilation, in concert with all the things that we've been talking about, they start to click in and they all everything becomes a little bit more viable. And we've really created a package. And that's what we, you know, tried to do when we articulated the DRI, that's Downtown Revitalization Initiative grant. It's a $10 million grant that we applied for and were in the finalists last year. They didn't do the grant this year because of COVID, but you know, I think we're teeing ourselves up well for more grant funding when it becomes available. And also, if we do this right, all of this will trigger the right buyers for these properties.
Well, thanks, Karen.
Yeah.
So we want to go on to the, I think we have, yeah, just now the,
Yeah, a couple more slides. These, as I
Right.
mentioned before, comes directly from the ideas wall. So people mostly talked about promoting tourism. So, you know, walking tours, creating sort of a entity that does, you know, takes care of different aspects of historic tourism. And also many people, as you can see in the second post here, many people liked the idea of more public art, so increasing like even like pop-up, temporary public art installations. And I also mentioned this in the waterfront, the central area of the waterfront will be a great area to promote people, you know, to get to that area as well, instead of you know, instead of just staying on the park or just staying in downtown, kind of like creating this connection in between the two. And also the other couple of things that they mentioned, one was the performances on the river, as Jeff mentioned just earlier. Somebody said something like Shakespeare on the Hudson. That's just an idea. And also protecting Austin character and the historic buildings was another topic that came out frequently. Sing Sing Prison Museum and the preview center is set to open, I believe, later this year, and this will be potentially an anchor institution and something that will bring visitors from the region, and so I potentially just expanding the also the economic development opportunities around the waterfront, which is really important, and just build upon it, promoting Austin as a tourist attraction. So as I noted here, there are multiple approaches that we will need to take in order to get it right, to, you know, do the proper advertising. Probably maybe there is a need for a coordinating entity, and in general, continue the support for arts and cultural organizations. Kind of a second point here, I wanted to mention that there is a visitor center, as you all probably know. It's located at the community center and currently includes exhibits of the old Croton Aqueduct and Sing Sing Museum. But as Sing Sing Museum will move to the waterfront, I posed a question whether the Austin Visitor Center should relocate somewhere else, since like one of the two exhibits will you know, kind of relocate somewhere else. So it's just an idea to open up more space at the community center. Perhaps the visitor center could be in a more central location. Those are just, you know, long-term things that we may want to think about.
by the way, the one thing our firm goes way back, as you may know, in Austin, to the urban cultural park idea in the 1980s. We actually did for the state the proposal at Sing Sing, but also this Austin Visitor Center, and it had more to do, the location of it had more to do just historically with the aqueduct itself and where the aqueduct was. But I was a bit, I think the exhibit is good on the old Croton Aqueduct in Sing Sing Museum, but when I walked in one day just to see it, I wanted to just see how it was, you know, kept up and everything. I really had to ask for people to be able to open it up for me. And, you know, I was the only, I think, visitor at that particular point. So it does raise a question of whether that could have a bit more visibility, or it could be, you know, publicized a little bit more, perhaps. It's just a question that's so.
Yeah. And this came out also in conversation with Bill Garrison from the Recreation and Parks Department. He mentioned that the exhibits are, you know, self-paced, everyone can just go and take a tour by themselves. But there are not a lot of people that go there. So he kind of mentioned that, we may want to rethink the space.
Karen, correct me if I'm wrong, but that was one of the things that we have talked about with Sin Prison Museum representatives, to relocate that exhibition space into the museum itself as soon as that room is available, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So the other thing is that just keep in mind in regards to the community center, we do have, budget obviously changed this year, but we had allocation of about $100,000, Karen, in our budget from last year that we have allocated to, some redesign and some rethinking of that at this point. But there's all the elements I think we have to consider, now that the Youth Bureau is coming to a place. So I think that's something that I'm not sure if Frank, did you add the Youth Bureau on any of this on here?
We didn't. I've got to defer to you on that.
So the Youth Bureau, and we may not have talked about this, perhaps we can, it doesn't exist yet, but we have we got county approval, and we're going to open a public hearing shortly to allow it. It'll be the first Youth Bureau established in Westchester County in 24 years. So that'll be housed at the rec center. We're a little tight on space there, and the building's sort of long overdue for a little bit of rehab. So we had different ways that we were going to go about planning that. COVID sort of took the steam out of that project. But I do think longer term, as a community center, if we're going to do with the Youth Bureau, that building's becoming busier and busier and busier. So our space needs there are pretty significant. I don't know if that's the best place for the visitor center anymore. So, we might be able to do think about that a little bit differently as we think about, and there was another building, somebody mentioned in the chat, the Olive Opera House, which was up for sale a while ago, and then we tried to, there were people who tried to get, it was called local vesting, where everybody just invested a small amount into the building, and that really didn't go anywhere. But I know that I've seen some work going on there too. So Jaime, I don't know if you know what's going on there.
Is that the one with the fire?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the owner, I'll tell you, actually, the owner or a representative of the owner called me, I don't know, a couple of months ago, and had said that he was interested in donating the building to the village.
Oh boy.
And so I said, that sounds like, I said, that's above my pay grade. And so I said, but you should reach out to the village manager. And I gave him your contact information, and I'm guessing that they never reached out to you. And then the owner is actually a local guy. I think his wife used to run a dance studio out of there. It was a tragic story, which I don't want to get into here. But essentially what I think they were talking about was they wanted to fix the building, and then once it was totally fixed, deeding it over to the village to use for some sort of...
I like that idea better than the not fixing it and giving it to the village.
Yeah, so I thought, it sounded so like nice and altruistic, and I've heard like just wonderful things about the owner.
He is, that's what I've heard too, so.
And again, like the history behind his ownership of that building connects to his wife who passed away, and it's sort of, again, a tragic story. But so I don't know, maybe we'll hear from them at some point soon, but.
And just to kind of piggyback in some of that stuff that we were talking about, even on the slide before about 200 Main Street and some of the buildings that we do own, and they kind of have been neglected through the years. I want to say 2019, to budget 2018, 2019, there was a line on our budget where it was, I want to say, close to $500,000 that was allocated to remediation on 200 Main Street. So those are capital projects that was put in to do a lot of the work then. Obviously, at that time, we didn't know all the 5 board members. We agree and have that project or have this money should be allocated or should be spent on this particular project. My concept, me personally, if I'm not going to get into that many details, but when we talked about the youth bureau and had the functions with the community center works, my idea was make 200 part of that, renovate that, bring it back, and bring it back to serve as back to the community that the way it was intended many years ago. But again, that's my personal opinion. I cannot speak on behalf of the whole board, and I will not be speaking on behalf of the whole board. But to me, that was something that, I think will be essential, bring it back to the details, the architectural elements of that building, and how do we integrate and how do we back to the community, So when we talk about history, resources, and culture, to me, buildings like that are essential for the history of what we represent or what Austin represents. So.
Right.
Yeah, thank you, Manny.
Yeah.
So a few more things here. We've seen some collaboration among artists and venues and businesses, I guess. So on top, an image of some events at the Sing Sing Kill Brewery, where they host, when COVID is not around, they host some events, some local artists, and just to promote collaboration. And there are also opportunities for economic development here. And also a picture that I took the other day at the First Village coffee shop, another display of local artists. In this case, it's this is actually 200 Main Street in the picture. It's a good way to showcase the work of local artists, attract more customers, and just make Austin more of a destination for arts and culture, all about arts and culture. And this raises again a question of maybe there is a need for a coordinating entity, and how do we create these synergies and collaborations among businesses and local artists, and maybe even municipal buildings hosting some local art.
Yeah, I'd like to just sort of like add a little piece to that. So when you talk about the potential need for a coordinating entity, I want to tell, I guess, the group a little bit about some of my experience working with the Yonkers Downtown Bid. And one of the things that the bid did was it took all of the organizations that were within the downtown Yonkers area and worked to coordinate all of the events that they had and sort of advertise them collectively. So the main strategy was online focused, sort of social media. We were able within a period of about 2 years to go from like 1,900 followers to around close to 6,000 followers. And so the impact that had for the organizations that we worked with, which included local art studios, as well as the public library and other facilities, was that we were able to take those events, which were kind of not well seen, because those local organizations would only have a couple hundred followers, and really was able to give them a big mouthpiece. So we were kind of promoting their events at the same time that they were, and that helped obviously build their own individual brands, but also meant that we were coordinating the promotion through social media, constant contact, and other ways. And we're also buying ads throughout the year that would drive people back to our page, which would ultimately yield dividends for followers down the road. And so the need for a coordinating entity that really kind of focuses on bringing people to various different types of cultural and sort of entertainment type events within Ossining, I think is huge. And there is something there. I know that there are organizations that you mentioned earlier, like Ossining Arts, but whether that's looking into some capacity building for those individuals, or sort of trying to find a way to help them better that strategy. I think there's a lot to look into to try to see if we can make that work. It yields dividends. I've seen it personally.
Yeah, yeah, great.
Thanks, Simon.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's a
Thank you.
good example.
Yeah. So,
I think it's a second to last, and this we went over this one already.
Yeah.
Frank mentioned the
Yeah.
special use permit for adaptive reuse in case of church buildings. We also saw the potential during the walking tour on the waterfront of these underutilized warehouses, beautiful brick buildings that may host artist workshops, for example, or really any cultural activity. And if we only can create the basis to make this happen and create the connection. And this will be beneficial for property owners that are currently underutilizing their properties, and also there's a potential to create new jobs as well. So I guess a little bit of a question here, what are the strategies to incentivize artists to move here? And no need to answer because I know there's a lot, but you know, in terms of let's think about this and let's think creatively about it. Last slide. I think this was mostly from the 2009 plan. We want to keep this concept of protecting historic resources while striking the right balance. So protecting these resources, but also leveraging them. We already talked about the 200 Main Street, the potential that is in there, the issues that we are facing. But from the 2009 plan, one of the objectives was gather funding for historic preservation efforts. So we will keep exploring on tax incentives and funding all from state and federal. So yeah, this will get into the plan. And I think this is my last slide.
and I think I'll just wrap up on the next couple of slides, and then
okay, thanks.
we'll be done, I think. I just wanted to mention again the subcommittee meetings. We've met with all the subcommittees. The one subcommittee meeting I think we want to have in the future, Karen, correct me, is the schools. And then we will have a wrap up on that. We've done community services, cultural and historic infrastructure, housing, economic development. You see them listed there. And then the schools will be our final one. And then just wanted to mention, I think you've all got now the sort of our online outreach. We've got the ideas wall, and Sylvia mentioned some thoughts from that in the arts and cultural. And then the public survey, which was extended at I think it might have been Omar's request through August 28th. And we sent you those results earlier today. So you might want to take a look through the public survey. So basically, and then ideas wall, public survey are basically now closed out, if you will, but the interactive map is something that continues. But what we're aiming for now, I think the next slide might just give you some total responses from these different outreach elements. And you'll see them here. So you might take a look at that public survey. I hope you all have it, and we'll share it with the trustees and the results of it. And then the next slide, I think just is next steps. And I just wanted to highlight that because I wanted to highlight some of the dates where the next committee meeting is October 20th, but it would also be the committee public hearing. And we're hoping to get these chapters up on the website before the hearing. So if I could suggest, perhaps you could get us any further comments by the end of the month, by say September 30th, on transportation, sustainable infrastructure. That would be good, because we could then get them up on the web so that the public has a chance to see them. And we would then have a public hearing still during preparation of the plan, but quite frankly, most of the substantive data would be online. So it would make for an informed public, which I think would be good. And then after the 20th, what we're hoping to do is you will have heard the final set of comments for the committee at the public hearing to meet with you on November 17th as a sort of wrap-up meeting where we could go over the action plan and the priorities, things that you mentioned at the beginning of this meeting. That's kind of a critical thing to do with you because that forms the basis then of the sending a draft plan to the trustees. So, and the trustees have started their own process, as I mentioned. If you care to, they're going to have a scoping session on the EIS that will cover the plan and the zoning. The scoping is just the beginnings of the EIS. It just outlines it, and that's going to be on the 24th of this month. So that's the next events. I think the immediate thing is just if we could get any comments that you wish to make by the September 30th, say that would be good.
Thank you, Frank. Two questions.
Go ahead. Yes.
Yeah. One is on the previous slide on the survey results. Thank you for sending those out. Is that something that we're going to be sharing more widely?
Yes, I think so. In that anything that goes to you, is per se a public document. So I think it would be good to share it. I think it would be good actually to. I have not discussed this with Karen or Jaime, but. This is up to you. I think though you might want to put it on the website so that the public at large sees the results on what they participate or they had an opportunity to participate in, and many people did participate in it.
I think that would be good. Yeah, I'm glad Karen agrees. I definitely think that would be good. And secondly is on the subcommittees. So I don't think that there was 100% clarity with members of all the different subcommittees about what kind of cadence they were going to have. My sense from speaking with you all is that they were going to be one-time meetings for the most part. Some of them may be meeting more than once, but that wasn't super clear. Can you clarify what the cadence of subcommittee meetings is and what how we can communicate that to folks, since I've gotten a question about that today?
Yeah, I saw that. Thanks for looping us in on that. Mm-hmm. I think you're right that an initial thought on the subcommittee meetings was to meet on each topic matter, which many of them, actually most of them, correspond with a chapter, and then get that chapter back to the subcommittee once that chapter was done. And I think that is what we want to do now. And then leave it up to the subcommittee, Karen, Jaime, if we need to meet with that subcommittee a second time or not, or they want to just put their comments into the public hearing. I think that's an open question on how we want to go about that. But what I do find many times is that the public hearing really crystallizes people to say, oh, this is it for the, this is a legal public hearing, I'm going to come, or I'm going to comment at that time. So those subcommittee members may also want to comment on October 20th.
It may not be a bad idea to recirculate the chapters to the subcommittees.
Okay.
And I think that, it is difficult to keep rescheduling. Like we've done a lot of meetings and, we're doing walks and everything else. But I do think that, again, people are busy and they lose the thread and they didn't check their email. So maybe we just send out for all the subcommittees, the chapters, and just ask them for another swipe at, now having some time to think about it, a little bit more perspective. I just want to make sure that people feel fully engaged. And we can even add people if people are interested in,
that'd be great, Karen. I think that'd be good because also a couple of chapters we want to put a few, we're adding just a few things. For instance, the Waterfront chapter, we had a very good walking tour. We've got ideas. We wanted to add that in, send it back, and so we can send that back to the subcommittee.
Right.
Same with downtown. We've got now more ideas even, and to touch that up and send it back to the group.
Yeah, and that way, it might be easier for people too, because if we have a lot of participation, sometimes it's hard to get through everybody's comments and
Yeah.
way people can look at it in more detail. Omar, how does that sound to you? Manny?
That sounds great. I would, if we can, when we're circulating those chapters, just clarify with the subcommittee members what that's what's going to happen, so that they're not expecting, like, similar to what we're doing, monthly conversations or bi-monthly or something.
Right. No, good idea. Great. Okay.
All right. Wonderful.
Very, very good. Yeah. All right, and Karen, that's pretty much what we had this evening.
It's great.
I'm sorry, go ahead. I don't want to cut anybody off. I did want to go back to that one slide. So somebody had something else to say? I'll go for it.
Go ahead. You go do your slide, and then I'll bring up my question real quick. Go ahead, Jaime.
So Stuart sent an email out. He's not on the call anymore, but he wanted to bring up the fact that we may be looking at needing to do the steering committee public hearing in person, theoretically. And so the question kind of becomes, how do the steering committee members feel about the potential of meeting in person and having a public hearing in person? If we do, it's going to be a hybrid deal. So it would be sort of like people could Zoom in to provide comments if they wanted, but you as committee members would be required to show up in person.
Is that, if we do a hybrid meeting, I'm not sure that everybody would need to be there in person, Jaime.
No, they don't, Karen, but part of the explanation that Stuart has had in the past is if a member of, at least in regards to the BOT, is if we decided to stay home, let's say, because it is a public meeting.
Oh, then you have to invite people into your house, yeah.
Correct.
Okay, so sometimes I think, so what happens is the governor, just so everybody understands, nobody's coming to your house. The governor has been extending the virtual meeting order every month. And then it expires in October 7th. I think it's highly unlikely that anybody's going to public meetings, mandatory public meetings anytime soon. But we will set up, as we do for our BOT meetings. I am not sure, though. I'm not going to challenge Stuart because he is.
Well, his email says that his email is basically saying it doesn't have to necessarily be in person unless, of course, the executive order is not extended, which it will likely be extended.
What we'll do is we just have to identify a date. We do it at the community center in a very, very large room, like we do for the board meetings now, the legislative sessions, and we'll work out the details there. And I still think if we have one, Manny, if we have one space where everybody can meet, I just don't see anybody stopping at somebody else's house. I just don't see it happening. So I think we'll be able to accommodate it. These are strange times we live in, so we're challenging every law in the book on open meetings.
Yeah, well, I guess the big question for me is whether or not this steering committee is comfortable having a public hearing that doesn't take place in person, that basically is totally virtual.
That's probably more likely.
And is that okay? Is the board okay with that? I mean, I think everybody's gotten really used to having these digital meetings, at least those of us who have to, be on these meetings 3 times a week. But, how does the board feel about that? The idea, because again, you don't take away from the ability for people to provide comments, even if they're not at that public hearing. Obviously, there's been a lot of public engagement. So part of this is just kind of, following the rules set forth in seeker. But if this was to take place only virtual, I mean, is that something that committee members are comfortable with?
I think it'd have to be fairly heavily moderated, right? Because it is public, and we'd have to make sure that there's time spent giving individuals. It can't be a free for all, right? But just people jumping in all the time, like, you know, we as a group are pretty good at managing ourselves in terms of who's going when and speaking. But at a public hearing, you know, you need to provide everybody an option, and usually there's a, you know, when you're doing it in person, there's a sequence that people line up or something like that. We just need to make sure it be managed very tightly.
We've done that at our legislative meetings. We haven't had like really big groups, but we can basically, there is ways that people can sort of raise their hand online, and we can go in an order or establish an order.
Yeah, we have public comments at planning board meetings, and Jaime, you know, controls the queue, and it's very orderly. So I'm happy doing it either way personally. If we, you know, my own comfort level, but I, you know, want to defer to the board or, you know, the steering committee, and also just make sure we're maximizing, you know, public participation without,
Yep.
You know, doing anything that's unsafe from a public health perspective. So.
Yeah, and I'm personally comfortable going down to the rec center and or wherever and doing something in an in-person.
Yeah, just
in-person matter as well.
Yeah, you also just keep in mind, you know, one of the reasons why the village board decided to start doing these hybrid meetings is because there's a lot of local laws that are being put on hold. We wanted to start working on them because it will affect some of the stuff that we're hoping to start working and implementing for next year. That being said, the other thing that we talked about in the board, and Omar, if I missed something, or Karen, or Maddie, you know, one of the things that we were talking about is that we are having the public meetings at the gym area, but if need to be that we needed to expand because we think or we feel that the public is going to be coming out, we have alternate locations within a community center where we can open up and have, you know, remote locations to combine different, you know, to be part of the public discussion. So it won't be everybody on, you know, on the gym area, but it will be more like in other rooms with a virtual setup as well. So just to give you guys you know, a different idea and how we're thinking of setting up for different public meetings, I guess.
Well, just asking as a person who has not been there for the public comment parts, has the Board of Trustees dealt with a situation where they have public comments from people who have shown up and public comments from people who are zooming in?
Yes.
Yes.
We by the time this happens, we'll have worked out all the kinks. We're doing our second one tomorrow night. It's really not. It was a little wonky the first night, I think, but it's really not. Doing the hybrid meeting is not. You know, something that we won't be able to do. It's and I think you know, people's comfort level and everything, but we are talking about likely the gymnasium, and there's a lot of room there.
And we're comfortable either way. The only thing I would mention is, as the preface to the public hearing, people are used to public hearings, but we usually find it helpful to emphasize that this is not a workshop. It's not a, you know, it's not a charrette, a design charrette. It's not a Q&A. It's really to hear the public's comments and statements.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So,
Right.
So I know that we're scheduled to end at 10. It's been a long conversation, a very good conversation now. Thanks everybody. But I did want to just, you know, as we would try to provide input and feedback to y'all on the chapters, I know, you know, we're kind of a little bit behind on stuff, but Manny and I had spent some time going through the Waterfront chapter and doing, you know, putting together kind of like a summary for the committee that we had sent out to them. So I just, while we did have a couple of minutes, I think Omar, you had a couple of questions or wanted to say something about some of the comments in there. I wanted to see if anybody else on the committee had kind of comments or thoughts on the comments that Manny and I summarized for everybody, just in keeping with the concept of providing feedback on the chapters. So.
That's helpful. Thank you, Pat. And thank you, Manny, as well for putting that together. My question initially is just in terms of process. What I envisioned was having a study hall that could be focused on something like this, so that we would make time to go back and review what some of the key questions are in these chapters after some of the designated readers have gone in and presented the questions. So I feel like I need to sit with it a little bit more to have like much more detailed thoughts. But this is exactly the kind of thing that I think is helpful, because like Frank said in the beginning of the meeting, these are just initial drafts. There's more information in a lot of these than what will ultimately go in the final versions. And so understanding where the real tensions are, what the key questions are that come up for us and that we want to ask and answer, I can tell you as a trustee is super, super helpful to be able to review and to have a sense of, because the five of us have our own areas of expertise, but there are a lot of blind spots that we have as well. So much appreciated.
Okay. No, okay, so that's fine. So, and I think that's fair. And so maybe the thought, and Melissa, I see you muted. I don't know if you had some thoughts.
Well, yeah, I mean, no, I agree. Definitely appreciate you and Manny taking that deep dive into the content. But yeah, I agree that the study hall format is like a suitable environment to kind of digest the information and process it in a way where we can come back to the bigger discussion here and have more of a fluid discussion about it. So yeah, I agree that definitely need to take a beat on that and just kind of process what you guys put together.
Okay, so maybe Melissa, maybe you and I can just we get together and we can try and figure out the best way to facilitate that for the group.
All right.
Yeah, the other thing I was going to suggest is if we can't block out evenings, we did meet for about a half hour when we selected our co-chair. So maybe we can figure out just like a half-hour lunchtime meeting where we could just do a chapter or something, and that might be best for everyone's time management.
Yeah, that's actually along the lines of what I was thinking in terms of if it's a very focused discussion, it's like, okay, folks, we sent out the stuff, we sent out the comments, we want to get together for 30, 45 minutes just to talk specifically about this very specific topic, and we can kind of keep it focused and wrapped in, and might be able to go through that.
Yeah, that definitely sounds good. Like a bite size, just kind of condense thoughts and questions and feedback or around the content. Because I think we're all to the point, or most of us anyway, where Zoom fatigue is kind of kicking in.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I think bite size, just opportunities to just kind of unpack some of the content will help, the conversations here at the steering committee flow. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Okay, well, that's all that BFJ had. So we may have arrived at a conclusion.
I think so.
It's up to you, Pat and Melissa, and
yeah, I think that's a
great.
Go ahead, Pat.
Yep. No, I was just gonna say I've got nothing else.
Yeah, okay, great. Well,
all righty.
Thank you all. Great. We'll look forward to comments.
Thank you.
Everybody drive home safely.
Thanks.
Good night.
Straight to the fridge for a beer.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Thanks.
Good night now. Bye-bye.